A quick disclaimer before we start the story. If you are a parent listening with young children, please be aware that we will be discussing some adult themes today. So you may want to preview the episode to decide if and how you want to discuss these topics with your kids before listening together. On today's episode of Think Forever, it's a story of faith. We'll see the life-changing impact of faith put into action, and that the Lord God always keeps his promises. In the scope of eternity, our lives are just a dot on a line that extends with no end. In this podcast, I tell stories about people who believed that and lived it, so that by looking at their lives, we might better understand how to think forever. Episode 4, Promise Keeper. "I'll be back next week," Corette stated, a grisly smile curling at the corner of his lips as he tossed 2 shekels onto the bedside table. Rahab squeezed her eyes shut as he stumbled out the door. 2 shekels. That's all it takes to measure the worth of a life. Or is my life even worth that? She rolled over and let her face warm in the sliver of afternoon light pooling through her open window. She knew better than to let her emotions invade her thoughts, and yet somehow they managed to weave their way into her days, refusing to be ignored. Rahab had been in this vocation for years to help meet the demands of an insurmountable family debt. The drill was always the same. A knock at the door, a nefarious look, flattery and all manner of debauchery, her body, an object for his pleasure, a meager payment to make a dent in her family deficit. The pain of it all was starting to wear on her like an open wound, festering and impossible to ignore. Rahab couldn't walk Jericho's streets without the awful reminder that she was unwelcome. She was on the receiving end of unpleasant taunts from men she grew up with, looks of scorn from their wives' faces as she passed them in the market, hushed gossip punctuated with words like harlot and whore, spoken just loudly enough to ensure they reached her ears as she walked by. Everyone knew who she was. Since she would never be marriage material, she ran an inn and a small linen business on the side to make ends meet. The inn had become the only glimmer of purpose in her life. It was a safe haven for the outsider, a place of welcome for the weary traveler. The city of Jericho was a military outpost, strategically placed at the entrance to the western side of Canaan from the Jordan. To cross over into this side of Canaan, a traveler would inevitably have to stop through the city of Jericho. Rahab's inn, situated within the walls of Jericho near the city gates, was a sure place for a wanderer to lay their head for the night. Rahab found herself mingling with people from all over the lands of Canaan and beyond, and they all came with stories and news of what was happening outside Jericho's walls. There were rumors going around, stories that kept repeating themselves through foreign wayfarers staying at the inn. Whenever Rahab found a moment to herself, her thoughts would quickly slip into a world of possibility. What if all the things they're saying are true? She'd wonder. A tap on the door suddenly snapped Rahab back to reality. Not another, she thought, as she smoothed out her hair and ironed her dress with the palm of her hands. Rahab swung the door open, but the face looking back wasn't at all what she expected. Talia, her younger sister, grabbed her hands, her eyes filled with urgency. "They're here, sister. People are saying the Israelites are camping out on the other side of the Jordan." The silence between them was deafening. Both women knew what that meant. The stories began circulating throughout Canaan decades ago. The Israelites had escaped Egypt through the many miraculous acts of their God. Every firstborn son in Egypt, dead. The Amorite kings, Sihon and Og, were brought to nothing after the Jewish people invaded, their kingdoms left in total ruin. The people of Yahweh were marching through the deserts of Canaan, claiming the land was their own. Whispers spread through Jericho like wildfire. Perhaps Jericho was in trouble. Someone brushed it off as folklore, another as an unnecessary worry considering how insignificant Israel was, and yet, in their heart of hearts, they trembled at the thought. Rahab included. Could all the stories about Egypt and Pharaoh, of swift victory and promised land possibly be true? Part of her hoped so. Part of her wondered, if he is who they say he is, would this holy God bring this terrible place to destruction? Would he spare anyone? Talia pushed past Rahab and stuck her head out the window, hand hovering just above her eyes to block out the sun, stretching her neck out as far as she could. Have you seen anything? Talia questioned. Not a thing, Rahab assured her. Rahab knew what she meant. Was attack on the horizon? Should they run for cover or defend their people? Rahab was a mix of emotions. She felt a sense of hope and excitement at the thought that this God, who seemed to be all-powerful and deeply caring of his people, could possibly be real, not just a story people told. But her eager anticipation was quickly eclipsed by a deep sense of dread when she considered her own life. Why would a holy God ever be inclined to spare someone like me? A disgrace and a whore, she thought. Well, no need to panic just yet, Talia attempted to assure Rahab, unconvincingly. They sat in heavy silence until the quiet was sharply interrupted by the sounds of footsteps at the front stoop. Customers. Talia shot her a knowing look. I'll come by tomorrow morning, she assured her as she made her way out the door. Rahab took a deep breath and made her way to the front, fully preparing herself to endure whatever vile requests came her way. However, to her pleasant surprise, she was greeted by two travelers on the hunt for lodging for the night. Their faces were marked by gentle smiles, their mouths full of polite pleasantries. One had a large burly beard peppered with flecks of gold, the other a face full of scruffy black hair. Rahab was instantly struck by the respect they extended her way. She had never met anyone like them. Where are you coming from? She asked in an effort to make polite conversation as she escorted the gentlemen to their rooms. Lasha, just over the Jordan, one of the men replied. Rahab's eyes lit up. If they crossed the Jordan, then surely they must have seen. They must know. Please, tell me, did you pass by the nation of Israel camping on the other side of the Jordan? They stared back in silence. Please, I must know. People have been talking. I know the God of the Jews is to be feared above all other gods. I've heard what he's done. If you know anything, please, I must know. The man with the large beard heaved a huge sigh. They are camping out on the other side of the Jordan. They will take this land, and, yes, you ought to fear. Rahab looked at them slyly. How are you so sure of these things? She didn't really need them to answer the question. She already had a hunch. Are all the stories true? Did your God really rescue you out of Egypt through the Red Sea all those years ago? Did he meet your people at Mount Sinai? Does his presence remain with you as you walk through these lands? Is this the land he promised to you? All you have said is true, the other man responded. Rahab breathed a sigh of what could only be described as relief, much to her surprise. It's true, she thought. Yahweh, the one who can bring nations to nothing and stop the most powerful of kings from having their way, is real. A hint of hope started to swell in her soul that very instant. If he can do that, perhaps he could help me. But before she could ask any more questions, Talia came running down the hall, heaving as she spoke. Rahab, you're okay. The king, he says there are spies in our midst. They think they may have come here for lodging to hide for the night. Don't worry, the king is sending help as we speak. She looked past Rahab and locked eyes with the two gentlemen, instantly aware of the danger she had put her sister in. It's okay, Talia, Rahab assured her. I have more to tell you, but for now go home. Trust me. Talia looked conflicted, but obeyed. As soon as she left, Rahab quickly escorted the two men up to her rooftop workspace among the stalks of flax. You should be safe here, she assured the men. Lay down among the flax tonight. I will help you escape in the morning. Thank you, miss, the scruffy one smiled. But may I ask, why are you showing us this kindness? Because I believe Yahweh is God, Rahab said, with all the confidence in the world. Moments later, there were shouts and commotion from down below. The crowd thickened and chanted in unison, "Bring them out!" Rahab rushed to the front entrance of the inn, coming face to face with Corette, who happened to be one of the king's men. "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, for they came to investigate the entire land." Rahab was ready with her response. Yes, the men did come to me, but I didn't know where they were from. At nightfall, when the gate was about to close, the men went out, and I don't know where they were going. Chase after them, quickly, and you can catch up with them. Her heart was racing. She knew she had just committed an act of treason against her people. If they sniffed out any hint of insincerity, the consequence would be torture or sudden death. Corette stared at Rahab for a moment, questioning her authenticity with his eyes, but at last he relented. "You heard her, men. To the gates!" He shouted over the crowds. As soon as they had cleared, Rahab rushed to her room, hot tears streaming down her face. Her allegiance was with Yahweh now, no longer with her people. Everything had changed, yet she was terrified. The question remained, is the holy God of Israel good? Will he spare me from this wrath? She ran upstairs before the two men fell asleep and dropped to her knees before them. I know that the Lord has given you this land, she passionately whispered. And that terror of you has fallen on us, and everyone who lives in the land is panicking because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two Amorite kings you completely destroyed across the Jordan. When we heard this, we lost heart, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. Now please swear to me by the Lord that you will also show kindness to my family because I showed kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father, mother, brothers, sisters, and all who belong to them, and save us from death." She knew this was a bold request, but was also assured that Yahweh had authority to answer it. "We will give our lives for yours," they assured her. "If you don't report our mission, we will show kindness and faithfulness to you when the Lord gives us the land." The three of them secured their agreement by devising a plan. a red cord tied to her window to indicate to the nation of Israel that they were to be spared from God's wrath. The night of the attack, they would rescue her and her family. Rahab knew they were running out of time. "You must leave right away. Go to the hill country so that the men pursuing you won't find you. Hide yourselves there for 3 days until they return. Afterwards, go on your way," she implored. She lowered each of them down by a rope through her window. "We'll be back," they assured her. And then they were gone. It took days for Rahab to convince her family to at least come stay at the inn. They remained doubtful, but relented, just in case there was a hint of truth in all the rumors swirling around. Finally, on a sunny afternoon, after days of family pacing and fighting, grumbling and doubting, Talia saw something on the horizon. "It's them!" she screamed. "They're coming!" Rahab's father stared out the window, dumbfounded and slightly embarrassed that he had ever doubted his little girl. They came, just as she said they would. The family huddled together by the window, full of anxious curiosity. It would take half a day for Israel's army to cross over the desert plains. All day, Rahab and her family cheered and cried and clung to one another as their anticipation mounted. But when the Israelites finally arrived, they simply took a walk around the perimeter and set up a camp for the night right outside of Jericho's walls. How very anticlimactic. Rahab's father hummed. "I wonder what their strategy is." Surely they were all tired from their journey, so a good night's rest possibly made sense, although the king of Jericho and all his men were probably rushing to their defenses while they slept. But Israel must know something they don't. The whole family attempted to get some sleep as well, but to no avail. The next day, Israel did exactly the same, marched around the city walls, then retreated back to their camp. Whatever shred of hope Rahab's family had disappeared immediately. "They're fools," Rahab's brother grieved. "What were you thinking, my child?" Rahab's father shook his head in disappointment that he ever let himself believe such silly stories. This God of Israel could be no rescue for them. The days continued on exactly the same. March, retreat, repeat. Their patience was thinning by the minute, yet Rahab remained unbothered. She knew Yahweh was faithful to his word. When her family saw what he would do, they would marvel at him. On the 7th day, they woke to find the army of Israel already making their trek around the city walls. But this time, it was different. They kept marching, and marching, and marching. 7 times they circled around the city. Rahab and Talia stuck their heads out the window with fixed concentration. "Don't get yourselves excited," Rahab's brother implored from the corner of the room. "Nothing's happening." But at the end of their 7th round, the army came to an abrupt halt. Silence unfurled across the land. Talia gripped Rahab's arm. The silence was suddenly punctured by the loud, vibrating buzz of trumpets blaring from a small group of soldiers scattered throughout the people. And then a terrible chorus of voices joined in, thundering a horrendous shout. Rahab's entire body shuddered at the eerie sound. Or was it the floor beneath her? Out of the corner of her eye, she saw stones cascading down the wall beside her and cracks quickly shaking their way throughout her bedroom. "Get back!" Rahab yelled to her family as the outer walls of Jericho crumbled to the ground. Everyone glued themselves to the opposite wall, clinging to each other and mumbling quick prayers to the God of Israel. Where else could they turn? They fixed their gaze on the red cord dangling from the window, somehow still intact, knowing the only hope they had in this world was mercy from a holy God. 2 familiar faces appeared amongst the rubble. a big burly beard, and a face full of scruff. Rahab beamed. The two men whisked Rahab and her entire family outside the crumbling city walls and settled them just outside the camp of Israel. They watched in horror as the city of Jericho filled with flames, a deep awareness that it should have been, would have been, them, had God not spared their lives. A kind Israelite woman walked over, her arms full of cloaks to keep them warm. Another came with a jug of fresh spring water. Still more came to set up beds on which to lay their heads and morsels of food to tide them over until dinner. Israel welcomed Rahab and her family as fellow citizens that night, as brothers and sisters, as fellow heirs to all of God's promises. For the first time, Rahab felt welcomed. "5 years later. Mama, why do you always say we are here by the mercy of God? What does that mean?" Rahab looked down at her son curled up on her lap and combed her hands through his curly head of hair, her heart swelling. So much had changed in a few short years. So much, in fact, that her sweet son, Boaz, had the blessing of growing up a Jew, with no knowledge that a few short years ago his own mother was outside the family of Israel. She'd been wanting to tell Boaz their story since the day she'd known he was in her womb, but the timing had never seemed quite right until now. Rahab, the one who was unwelcome and unworthy, the one who was never going to be marriage material and would always be a disgrace, had been saved by the mercy of God and adopted into his family. Soon after her rescue, she had found herself betrothed to an Israelite man named Salmon. Salmon was tender and gracious, loving and attentive. Nothing like the men she had known before. They'd married on a hot September day in the land flowing with milk and honey, and had begun to build a life together amongst God's people. Rahab recounted all the marks of God's kindness in her life as Boaz nestled into her arms. "Yahweh did all of this to show the world who He is, my son. He's up to something, and He intends for you to be a part of it. Did you know that? This redeeming love He's shown is for this very purpose, that in you, in us, all the nations of the world will know He is the Lord who was and is to come. You'll see, my Boaz, and you'll marvel at our God." Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Forever. The story was written by Alyssa Pobletti and read by me, Joe Mayers. If you're enjoying our show, we'd love it if you would subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. More information about this show and our live performances can be found on our website at www.thinkforever.org. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week when I interview the author about her story, Promise Keeper.